Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day when France's president hosted a Libya conference. We're talking about it in the company of Claudio Gazzini, a senior Libya analyst at International Crisis Group, who joins us from Rome. Welcome back as well to activist and commentator Emad Badi, who is with us from Tripoli, the Libyan capital. Jalil Harchaoui, researcher at the University of Paris at Saint-Denis, who is with us here in the studio, as is Cécile Allegra, investigative filmmaker, who is often out and about. You have a project right now where you're following those that you filmed on the Libyan side and are now made it to Europe?
Not exactly, but what happened in the past 2 years is that we worked on the ground in between Tunis and Libya with several investigators, Libyan investigators, human rights defenders actually, and French international criminal investigator Céline Bardet, the founder of We're Not Weapons of War, and basically we unveiled a system of rape targeting men, primarily men, throughout the country in the illegal prison held by militias. And this piece is going to come out in September, but already was very widespread in the press and is currently being generating further investigation.
Yeah, and that's a good illustration that you have this situation of lawlessness with dueling militias, dueling governments in Libya, and that's been going on since the fall of Gaddafi in 2011, despite the uncertainty inside of the country. The host of the Libya conference calling it an historic day.
Elections must be well prepared with all Libyan institutions to advance the shared objective of stabilizing and unifying Libya. Libyan leaders commit to accept the results of elections and ensure appropriate funds and strong security arrangements are in place. Those who violate or obstruct the electoral process will be held accountable.
All right, a translation there of what we heard from Emmanuel Macron. Your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry. In fact, I was trying to think about what we previously said, and I do think there is a problem in today's declaration, is that it puts aside all the issues on human rights violations currently going on in Libya. And
you heard just before the break Jalil Harchaoui saying that for him, he didn't know quite or he didn't think that finding peace was necessarily
but I have to say.
What was the objective for you of Emmanuel Macron?
For me, Emmanuel Macron wanted to make up for France's mistakes in the 2011 intervention and wants to restore the image of France in the Libyan conflict. That's a goal. He wants also to have a diplomatic,
so he doesn't want to broker peace. He wants to broker peace, right? I mean, that's what he did.
He has an issue with. He has a goal, and his goal is to ensure security. That has always been his main goal with Libya. Prevent migrants from crossing the Mediterranean, prevent ISIS from reforming a jihadi land in the Sahel. That's his goals. And
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It depends when you think that, because you have to accept the fact, if you make a deal and if you turn Libya into a legitimate partner to handle the migration issue, okay, then you can fund Libya, you can make them an official partner, as Europe did with Turkey. The problem is that you know when you do this that you're still sending millions of people, keeping them in hell. And on the human rights level, it's a catastrophe. There is no way the handling of the migration situation can be, delegated to Libya. This is too much pressure, and I want to underline that the system of rape that we unveiled, that had never before been documented, is targeting Libyan men. And these Libyan men are university professors. Yes, I can see the face of your guest from Libya. University professors, people who have a role in society, tribal chiefs, and people who count. And once they are kidnapped and detained and raped in those prisons, they come out and they cannot participate anymore in the discussion, in the peace process, because they have been soiled. So it's a war weapon. and that has very, very serious consequences, and that has appeared nowhere during those debates today.
Ahmed Badi, you agree?
Apologies, what did you ask exactly?
I said, do you agree that the issues of human rights have not been put front and center, and that they should have been at this this conference?
Well, I mean, France, among other states, has participated in creating this culture where these four Libyan leaders, their use of violence, their use of aggressive approaches to control territory, which is, for instance, General Haftar's whole rhetoric is that he controls specific parts of Libya. They have created this culture of aggression and grasping territory being something that grants you legitimacy. Jalal mentioned, or was it Claudia earlier, that Haftar controls now 30% of the territory. That wasn't the case earlier on, and that wasn't the case before. He was not granted this Western legitimacy until Macron gave it to him, and that was because he used this particular culture of aggression. So on one hand, you have the humanitarian side of things that dictates that these issues should be brought up. On the other hand, you have policies and the way countries deal with Libya that may
okay, concretely, Emma, let me ask you concretely, what do you do if you're the president of France? Who's your interlocutor? Because again, you have these rival governments. Who is the legitimate person that Macron should be dealing with or should be bolstering?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? At this point, I feel that. As a Libyan person, for instance, I don't feel that any of these people actually represent the struggle of random people on the ground, because all of them benefit from this status quo being perpetuated. One of the objective of this initiative is actually having the financial institutions become unified again, the military becoming unified again, which is something that obviously all of the Libyan community wants, but they also want a tangible economic impact from initiatives such as these. And this may happen slightly, but it won't happen to the point where people would feel that this is a candidate that I trust with my vote.
It's been
the Libyan people at this point in time. Yeah.
No, I was just going to ask Claudio Gazzini about this. It's been 7 years since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. And I want to ask you, Claudio Gazzini, you have a situation where if you're Western countries and you have public opinion that doesn't want to see this influx of migrants, that doesn't want to see chaos in Libya anymore, what's your solution? Do you opt for backing a quote-unquote strong leader, or do you have to go in and police everything in order to set up, restore a failed state?
Well, I think the mistake that has been occurring over the past few years is just to think that the solution in Libya comes through certain personalities. You know, you invest on one, you invest on Haftar, and then you invest on Sarraj, and you deal with them and think that everything will fall in place. So it's this excessive focus on personalities that somehow has created this situation that is unable to resolve itself, because the Libya crisis cannot be resolved through personalities, through individuals.
Yeah, but excuse me for interrupting, but for more than 4 decades, there wasn't even a state. It was all based around one individual. So how do you make that switch from having a complete cult of the personality under Gaddafi to having these institutions, as you say, that are stronger than any one person?
Well, I mean, the problem is Libya under Gaddafi was relatively stable. There were no weapons. There were no interest groups that were able to oppose that man. So there was some kind of order, and that's not the case of Libya today. The Libya crisis today is a political crisis. It's an economic crisis, and it's a security crisis because you have military factions still fighting each other. It's an economic crisis because most Libyans live in very bad conditions these days because of cash shortage, because of the disparity between black market exchange rate and the official exchange rate, and because of the political divide. So the best solution, or rather the best strategy to stabilize Libya is not just to invest on one man or the other, is rather to have an integrated approach where you deal with the economy, the military, and the politics of the current divides in a simultaneous and self-reinforcing way. Unfortunately, even today's summit did mention the need to unify the economic and financial institutions. It did make mention of the need to push for or commit to the unification of the military, which is currently divided. But at the end of the day, the main solution that was put on the table was elections. And elections on their own will not fix the country. There needs to be a greater priority given to fixing the economy and improving economic governance. There needs to be greater emphasis on the security track and the security strategy, so that politics, security, and economy can work back to back.
If you want to invest in that economy and develop infrastructure, you need a credible interlocutor. How do you get that?
That's what he tried to
Well, it's a two-way process, because you're not going to invest in an economy because you have a credible interlocutor, and you won't have a credible interlocutor unless you start fixing the economic issues. Because let's not forget it, and this is something that the UN envoy often reminds his audiences when he gives Security Council briefs, that Libya today is a country that's being deprived of its own resources because there's a constant predation of the state finances. This means that political actors, interest groups can tap into the state resources and fuel, in a certain sense, the conflict and maintain the status quo. So you're not going to have a credible interlocutor until you're able to stabilize the economy and put barriers to this ability of various interest groups and political groups to tap into the state resources. So it's a two-way process.
Two-way process. You mentioned that UN Special Envoy. His name is Ghassan Salameh, and he says that, well, we do have to push forward. We do have 7 years after the fall of Gaddafi. You can't wait around any longer for consensus. His argument, try to get as many people on board. And yes, Ghassan Salameh in favor of that December 10th date for a presidential election.
Unanimity is as difficult to achieve in Libya as it is in France or Lebanon or any country. Unanimity is an illusion, but we have to find a dominant opinion. And this dominant opinion, you can help to crystallize it by being a bit creative in the way you present the different options.
Jalal Hashawi, do you agree?
Well, I disagree with the focus on the elections, just the same way as Claudia said. I think there's clearly an emphasis that is not really explainable, and that's basically what I was trying to say earlier. It seems that the main achievement today, and probably the main desire before the meeting, was to actually come up with this date, to actually set the date for the first time.
But we had the sense, listening to Ghassan Salameh, that the other achievement was to, well, get everybody in the same room to a certain degree.
Yeah, you could have done that without the rush. And the rush seems to me a French thing,
Yeah.
As opposed to a UN thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so why is a different question. I don't want to say too many negative things about today. I think because of the presence of African states, because of the presence of the Libyans, the fact that now you have this high level of prestige and a summit that has been taken so seriously by so many actors, I think that it presents a lot of potential. Now, the question I ask myself is the follow-up. Is the team behind Macron and Macron himself, do they think that the one event was going to address everything? Now they can drop the ball and go move on to the next thing? Or is there going to be a fantastic level of follow-up, which I think is required here? Is the ball going to be passed over to the UN?
That's what's going to happen.
Because the UN is not capable of doing what France has done today. France, only a state like France can achieve what was achieved today. And what it was achieved today is not nothing. I don't call it a photo op.
So by holding this summit, did Macron help or hurt Ghassan Salame's efforts?
It depends on the behavior of France. Because we know that the spoilers in Libya are going to do what they do best, which is spoil. The UN has been trying very, very hard as what it is, the UN. Now, is France going to maintain the level of attention? That would be a fantastic thing to do, but I'm not sure it's going to happen.
Cécile Allegro?
No, I think there is a risk that it undermines the UN process of consultation. They go. Ghassan Salamé has decided to consult city by city, to go slowly. But again, of course, it's an attempt. Now, my real concern is about the level of security for Libyans. Because what I have seen on the field is that Libyans are suffering, and the world is not considering that. They are focusing on the migration problem, which is huge. And let's not forget that there was a boat a month ago who rescued 69 migrants, and the Italian authorities told the SOS Mediterranean boat, no, leave the rest of them, leave the rest of the people who were drowning. The Libyan coast guards are going to take care of them. And they don't save migrants. They recapture them and they re-put them in the hand of the smugglers. But again, I don't know how you can work on a territory in which the smuggling business has become so important in the past years. Let's not forget that. It's millions of people. It's a huge economy. So, and if you don't address this question and you just try to transform Libya into a legit partner in order to fund Libya, maybe to help unify the army. Okay, it's a first step, but what's next? You're going to deal with militia like the Italian ministry Minniti did in Sabrata, dealing with, a smuggler.
Dealing with militias and smugglers.
Yes, to prevent people from crossing the Mediterranean. And again, this system here is creating a very, very insecure environment for Libyans who live in the fear of being kidnapped at the end of the street, detained for you never know how long a period, okay? Because the people I've met, they came out of jail after 3-4 years of detention, and have endured like 10, 15, sometimes 25 rapes. The men I've met in Tripoli, so and this is the people I've met are from all parties, okay? Sliten, Misrata. Any part of the country is concerned because there is a retaliation system. Once you are raped, you get out, you try to find a militia to have revenge, and then someone else gets raped and detained, and you have your revenge. For you don't know how long the period, this depends, but it's a never-ending story. So basically, everyone has committed a crime here in Libya today, every party, so if you don't address this, it already occurred in the Misrata and Tawerga negotiation. They left the problem of rape outside the negotiation because it was the ultimate crime, the one that you cannot put on the table. Otherwise, you don't achieve an agreement. So what with all those people?
And that was a little bit what we heard from Ghassan Salamé, which is you're never going to get consensus on everything. At some point, you have to try to move forward. Emad Badi, tell us a little bit about life these days in Tripoli and whether or not you see light at the end of the tunnel.
Sorry, whether or not I see what exactly?
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, okay. Well, I think Cécile covered the migration bit quite well, but I'm going to speak more about the Libyan perspective or the random Libyan citizens' perspective regarding this initiative. Now, on one hand, you obviously have this, despite the fact that they were focused on being inclusive, there were also certain groups that were marginalized, especially those involved in the security apparatus, which are generally the ones that really do the spoiling. So there's that dimension that may devolve within the next few months. On the other hand, you have to also take into account France's credibility as mediator for the random Libyan citizen. I think that at this point, both Libyan and international actors have questioned somewhat whether France is the adequate mediator for a political deal with Libya. And it's the same exact thing for Egypt being the mediator of a military, of a security reform initiative. So on one hand, you have groups that are marginalized, and on the other hand, you have Libyans that really, if this isn't followed up with some tangible steps that are taken on the ground, and ideally in Libya, they will not necessarily have a buy-in to this process.
So who's a credible mediator?
With regards to sorry?
Who's a credible mediator?
Well, someone that would ideally try and position themselves at equal distance from both, which I think neither Egypt nor France has. But at the end of the day, who has? And that's also the other million-dollar question. Perhaps the U.S. would be a more credible mediator, but I think that, as Jalal pointed out earlier, at this point, the foreign policy of the U.S. towards Libya is let the EU deal with it, following up on the light footprint they had going on back in the 2011 days. So that's not an option at this point.
Claudio Gazzini, let me ask you something. We've seen other nations on the African continent where the state has effectively collapsed. In Somalia, I could give the example of the Central African Republic, even to a large degree, DR Congo. Once it's broken, it's hard to put back together again. Is it a different case when it comes to Libya, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, the light is very dim at the moment, but the difference between the cases that you mentioned and Libya is essentially that Libya is potentially a very rich country. In a normals, it's an oil-rich country. 95% of its budget depends on oil exports. In normal situations, it can export 1.6, 1.8 million barrels of crude a day, and this brings in potentially a lot of money. So Libya, in theory, has the resources in order to fund a fixing program. The difficulty is actually get the parties to agree on what fixes need to take place and what is the strategy ahead. In order for the light at the end of the tunnel to become brighter, we need I think three things. One is what the UN is already doing, this very slow bottom-up process of trying to bring Libyans together, trying to bring them around a common platform, around a common political narrative, I would say, about the state, and a common political sort of identity, a shared identity and shared political goals. And that's a slow process because of the very nature of bottom-up processes, but it's ongoing. We need to have the international convergence over the process and over the political steps and security and economic steps that need to be taken in order to fix the country. And today's summit was an attempt to bring together and have the international community talk with one voice. I'm not sure it really materialized, this sort of coming together of the internationals, because the summit itself created frictions and with some important international partners who have differing views on the timeline for the political process. But we need international convergence if we are to fix Libya. And we need willingness of those individuals and groups that are currently in power to break the status quo. So to put aside their own personal interests or economic interests and allow for a renewal of the political scene.
Which they won't do without pressure.
Without these three interlocking. Without pressure, exactly. So without these three steps simultaneously, and with more pressure from their own constituencies and from the internationals, it'll be hard to change the dynamics.
All right, we'll leave you with one reaction from a viewer, Sharon, on Twitter, saying declaring a December 10th election is one thing, making it happen is another. What laws to determine who's eligible to run? How to build an educated electorate in just months? Is Libya safe? Will militias accept the results? So many questions indeed. I want to thank you, Claudio Gazzini, for joining us from Rome. I want to thank Emad Badi in Tripoli, Jalal Harshawi, Cecile Allegra. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
French Connections, presented by Florence Villeminot.
They're known for their cuisine and saying hello with a kiss. They only work 35 hours per week, when they're not on strike, that is. How true are these clichés about France? Every week, Florence Villeminot tears apart stereotypes. Join us for insight into French culture and current events to understand what makes the French so unique.
French Connections on France 24 and France24.com.